The sun bathed the outdoor wedding venue in a golden glow, casting a warm radiance over the white draped chairs and the breathtaking floral arch under which Sarah and Daniel were about to exchange vows. Guests murmured excitedly, their faces lit with joy, as the soft strumming of a harp filled the air. It was the perfect day, the day Sarah had dreamed of since she was a little girl. Everything had fallen into place, just as she had envisioned, down to the last detail. Her dress, a flowing white gown with delicate lace sleeves, hugged her frame beautifully, and the long veil trailing behind her made her look like she had stepped right out of a fairy tale. Daniel stood at the altar, adjusting his cufflinks, his deep blue eyes filled with anticipation as he watched her approach. His best man nudged him playfully, whispering something that made him chuckle, but his gaze never left Sarah. However, as Sarah took slow, measured steps down the aisle, her heart full of love and excitement, she noticed something strange. Right beside her was Max, her golden retriever, who had been her loyal companion since college. She had trained him to be calm and well-behaved, and he was supposed to walk beside her gracefully, just like they had rehearsed. But something was off. Max's ears were perked up, his golden fur bristling slightly. His tail, which usually wagged happily, was stiff. His posture was tense, and his deep brown eyes darted anxiously around the guests before settling on Daniel. Then he let out a low, uneasy growl. Sarah faltered for a moment, confusion washing over her. Max never growled, especially not at Daniel. He adored Daniel. They had spent countless evenings playing together, and Daniel had been the one to sneak Max treats under the dinner table. But now, Max's body was rigid with tension, his eyes locked onto Daniel with an unsettling intensity. Guests started whispering among themselves, sensing the change in energy. Sarah hesitated. A pit formed in her stomach as Max's growl deepened. It wasn't an aggressive growl, it was warning, fearful. He stepped in front of Sarah, blocking her path, his stance protective. A chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. And then, as if driven by some unseen force, Max barked loudly, making everyone in the crowd jump. Sarah froze. What was her dog trying to tell her? A hush fell over the guests as Max's bark echoed through the open-air venue. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs. She glanced around, expecting someone, maybe even Daniel, to laugh it off, to say it was nothing. But no one did. Everyone just stared. Daniel's expression shifted. His smile, once warm and inviting, flickered, faltered. He took a small step forward, raising his hands as if to calm the dog. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice gentle but slightly strained. "What's wrong?" But Max didn't calm down. Instead, he bared his teeth slightly, still standing protectively in front of Sarah. His muscles were tense, his eyes locked on Daniel as if he were staring at a threat. Sarah swallowed hard. "Max?" she murmured, bending down slightly to touch his head. His ears twitched, but he didn't take his eyes off Daniel. "What's going on, boy?" The murmurs among the guests grew louder. People shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Sarah's father, standing nearby, frowned. "Sarah, honey, maybe he's just overwhelmed by all the people," he suggested, though even he didn't sound convinced. Sarah wanted to believe that, but something about Max's reaction didn't feel random. It felt intentional, like he knew something she didn't. Daniel let out a nervous chuckle. "It's okay, everyone. He's probably just being protective." He turned back to Sarah, extending his hand toward her. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's not make a big deal out of this." But Sarah couldn't move. A strange, sinking feeling had settled in her stomach. She had always trusted Max. He had an uncanny ability to sense things. Bad energy, dangerous people. He had warned her about things before. Little things, like when a repairman had turned out to be a scam artist. She had learned never to ignore him. And right now, Max was telling her something. Sarah straightened up and looked at Daniel carefully. His tuxedo was perfectly pressed, his hair neatly styled. He looked like the same man she had fallen in love with, the same man she was supposed to marry. But why was Max reacting this way? She glanced at her dog again. His paws were firmly planted, his stance unwavering. He wasn't just being difficult, he was trying to stop her. Sarah's hands trembled as she took a step back. She started, her voice unsteady. I can't do this, not yet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's face went pale. What? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. And then Max did something even more shocking. He lunged. Max's sudden movement sent a wave of shock through the wedding guests. A collective gasp filled the air as he lunged, not to attack, but to grab the hem of Sarah's dress between his teeth and pull her back. Sarah stumbled slightly, her heart hammering in her chest. She had never seen Max behave this way. He wasn't aggressive, wasn't snarling, but his entire body was rigid with urgency. He was trying to stop her. "Max, stop!" Sarah exclaimed, gently tugging her dress away from his grip. But he held firm for a few seconds longer before finally releasing it, stepping in front of her again. Daniel's face darkened, his jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice edged with frustration. I don't know," she stammered, looking between Daniel and Max. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. He's never acted like this before. Daniel let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "It's just a dog, Sarah," he snapped, forcing a tight smile. "You're letting a dog ruin our wedding?" That comment made something in Sarah's gut twist. Just a dog? That didn't sound like the Daniel she knew. He had always loved Max, had always been playful and affectionate with him. But now there was something cold in his eyes, something irritated, almost desperate. "Maybe he senses something," she said quietly, studying Daniel's face. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Senses what? That I'm nervous? That's normal, Sarah. We're about to get married." His voice softened, but there was an unmistakable tension beneath it. "Come on, sweetheart, don't do this." Sarah wanted to believe him. She wanted to push past the fear clawing at her chest and just say, "I do." But Max wouldn't move. He was still there, still blocking her path, still staring at Daniel with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Sarah noticed something. A woman near the back of the crowd, a woman she didn't recognize, was shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She was pale, almost sickly looking, and her hands were trembling as she clutched her purse tightly. Something about her was off, and the moment Sarah locked eyes with her, the woman's face drained of all color. Then she stood up abruptly and bolted toward the exit. The moment the woman sprang from her seat and rushed toward the exit, a ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Guests turned their heads, whispering in hushed tones, trying to figure out what was happening. Sarah's pulse quickened. Something about that woman's reaction sent a shiver down her spine. Who was she? Why did she look so panicked? Max barked again, loud, sharp, urgent. It wasn't Daniel he was focused on anymore. It was her. Without thinking, Sarah took a step forward. "Wait," she called out, her voice firm but shaking. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated just for a second, her shoulders stiffening, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she moved faster, pushing through the chairs, nearly stumbling in her heels as she tried to escape. "Hey!" Sarah's father, sensing something was very wrong, stepped in front of the woman's path. She came to a screeching halt, her breathing ragged. Daniel let out a harsh sigh, rubbing a hand over his face in frustration. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Sarah, this is our wedding. Can we just focus on—" But Sarah ignored him. Her instincts screamed that this woman, whoever she was, had something to do with Max's reaction, and she wasn't about to let her slip away. "Who are you?" Sarah repeated, stepping closer. Her wedding gown dragged across the grass, but she barely noticed. "Why are you running?" The woman swallowed hard. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. Her blue eyes darted around wildly, like a trapped animal. I shouldn't be here," the woman stammered, her voice thin and shaking. "I didn't mean to. I just thought—" Max let out another low growl, making the woman flinch. She took a shaky breath, squeezing her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I thought you deserved to know the truth." A cold wave of fear rushed through Sarah's veins. "The truth about what?" The woman's lips trembled. Her eyes flicked to Daniel, then back to Sarah, and then her next words shattered everything. "About him," she whispered. "About Daniel." Silence fell over the wedding like a thick fog. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. The murmurs from the guests faded as every eye locked onto the trembling woman. Daniel stiffened. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice suddenly sharp. His hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. Sarah turned to him, searching his face. "Daniel," she said slowly, barely able to get the words out. "Who is she?" He scoffed, forcing a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I have no idea. I've never seen her before in my life." The woman let out a shaky breath, her eyes glistening with tears. "You're lying." Sarah's stomach twisted. Max was still tense, his growl low and unrelenting, like he was confirming what she already suspected. The woman turned back to Sarah, her face pale. "My name is Olivia," she said softly, voice trembling. "And I'm so sorry, but I had to come. You needed to know before it was too late." "Know what?" Sarah asked, her voice rising. A cold sweat broke across her skin. "Tell me." Olivia inhaled sharply, and then she said the words that made Sarah's world tilt on its axis. "I'm his fiancée." Gasps erupted around them. A few guests covered their mouths in shock, others whispered in disbelief. Sarah felt like the air had been sucked from her lungs. "What?" she whispered, barely able to form the word. Daniel's face turned ghostly pale. "That's insane," he snapped, shaking his head. "This woman is crazy." "I'm not," Olivia cried. "I swear to you, Sarah. He's been engaged to me for over a year. We were supposed to get married last summer, but he disappeared. He told me he had to work things out, and then he just vanished. I only found out today that he was marrying someone else." Sarah felt dizzy. Her vision blurred as her mind struggled to process what she was hearing. She turned to Daniel, searching for something, anything, in his expression that would tell her this wasn't real, that this was some terrible misunderstanding. But all she saw was panic, not shock, not confusion, panic. Max barked again, his deep, warning tone filling the air. And suddenly, Sarah knew she had almost married a liar. Sarah's knees felt weak. The world around her blurred. Whispers, gasps, the murmurs of the wedding guests all faded into a dull hum in the background. Her chest tightened as she turned to Daniel, her hands trembling. "Tell me she's lying," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around wildly as if looking for an escape. "Sarah, this is ridiculous," he stammered. "I don't even know this woman." But Olivia stepped forward, pulling out her phone. With shaking fingers, she tapped the screen a few times before turning it toward Sarah. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There, on the screen, was a picture of Daniel. Her Daniel. Smiling, his arm wrapped around Olivia in a cozy embrace. They looked happy, familiar, the way Sarah and Daniel had looked once. Her stomach lurched as Olivia scrolled through message after message, Long, sweet texts filled with promises, plans, and love. Then, the last one. Daniel, I need some time to figure things out. I love you. Just wait for me. The date was from a year ago, right before she had met him. Sarah took a step back, shaking her head. No, she mumbled. No, this can't be real. Daniel reached for her hand, his expression desperate. Sarah, listen to me. She's crazy. She's trying to ruin our wedding. Max barked again, sharp, insistent, blocking Daniel from stepping closer. His growl rumbled low in his throat, unwavering. And for the first time, Sarah didn't just hear it. She understood it. Daniel wasn't panicking because he was falsely accused. He was panicking because he had been caught. You lied to me, Sarah choked out, stepping further away from him. Daniel's face darkened. His eyes flashed with something unreadable, something that made her skin crawl. I love you, he said, his voice suddenly firmer. Don't throw everything away over some psycho showing up at our wedding. But Sarah was already shaking her head. Max had known all along. He had sensed it, had tried to stop her, had warned her the only way he knew how. And now, standing there in front of the man she thought she knew, Sarah realized something devastating. She couldn't marry him. The weight of realization crashed down on Sarah, suffocating and unrelenting. Her heart pounded as she stared at Daniel, the man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her future. And yet he wasn't who she thought he was. Max stood firmly in front of her, a living barrier between her and the man she was moments away from marrying. The warning in his eyes was clear. Daniel's expression shifted, morphing from desperation into something colder. He clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Sarah, he said, his voice lower now, strained. Don't do this. Don't humiliate me in front of everyone. She let out a bitter laugh, one that tasted of heartbreak. Humiliate him? Was that really what he was concerned about? Not the fact that he had betrayed her, that he had strung her along while another woman had been waiting for him. This isn't about you, she snapped, her voice stronger now. This is about me, about how you lied to me, about how you used me. Her voice wavered, but she pushed through. How many more women are out there, Daniel? How many others have you fed the same lies to? His face twisted into something almost unrecognizable. I made a mistake, he admitted, taking a step closer. I chose you, Sarah. That should mean something. A cold shiver ran down her spine. I chose you. As if she were an option, a backup plan, a replacement for whatever life he had abandoned. You don't get to choose me, she whispered. I choose myself. The crowd was silent now. Every guest, every family member, every friend watched in stunned disbelief as Sarah slowly reached up and pulled the engagement ring off her finger. The diamond sparkled mockingly in the afternoon light. She held it out for a moment before letting it slip through her fingers. The small clink as it hit the ground felt final. Daniel's face hardened. His mask was slipping, revealing the anger simmering beneath. You're making a mistake, he hissed. You're going to regret this. Max growled again, stepping between them protectively. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling her strength return. No, she said firmly. The only mistake would have been marrying you. And with that, she turned her back on Daniel. A hush fell over the wedding venue as Sarah turned away from Daniel, her heart hammering in her chest. Every fiber of her being told her this was the right decision, but that didn't make it any less painful. The man she had loved, the future she had imagined. It was all crumbling before her eyes. Max, her loyal companion, walked beside her as she took slow, deliberate steps away from the altar. The whispers of the guests barely registered in her mind. She could hear her mother calling her name, hear Daniel muttering something under his breath, but none of it mattered, not anymore. Then Olivia, the woman whose presence had shattered the illusion, stepped forward hesitantly. Sarah, she murmured, her voice laced with sympathy. I I know this isn't how you wanted today to go. I know this hurts. Sarah turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. Olivia's face was full of remorse, her eyes filled with understanding. And strangely, instead of anger or resentment, Sarah felt something else. Relief. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, "for telling me the truth." Olivia gave a small, sad nod. "You deserved to know." Behind them, Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "So that's it? You're just walking away? You're seriously going to let a dog and a random woman ruin our wedding?" Sarah turned back to him, this time with no hesitation, no doubt. "No, you ruined it," she said, her voice steady. "You ruined it the moment you decided to lie to me, and if Max hadn't warned me, I would have walked right into a life built on deception." Daniel scoffed, shaking his head, but she didn't give him another second of her time. Instead, she lifted her dress slightly and walked toward her family, toward her friends, toward freedom. As she reached the edge of the venue, she felt a hand slip into hers. It was her father. His eyes were filled with pride, and he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You did the right thing," he whispered. Sarah exhaled deeply. It still hurt, but beneath the ache there was something else, something new. Peace. Max wagged his tail and nudged her leg as if to say, "I told you so." She let out a soft laugh, wiping away a tear. "You did, buddy," she murmured. "You really did." And with that, Sarah stepped into her future, one that, for the first time in a long time, felt hers. Sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected places, even from a loyal companion who sees what we refuse to. Sarah almost walked into a life built on lies, but thanks to Max, she chose herself instead. Trust your instincts, trust the ones who truly love you, and never be afraid to walk away from what doesn't serve you. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the right path isn't always the easiest, but it's always worth it.